I've learned that silence can be both a sanctuary and a trap. For 3 years, I had worn silence like a second skin in my husband's family home, soft, unassuming, careful not to disturb the delicate equilibrium that existed long before I arrived. I was the newcomer, the outsider who had married into their carefully constructed world, and I understood, perhaps too well, that my place was to blend in rather than stand out. My husband, Daniel, was the younger of two children. His sister, Victoria, had always been the sun around which their family orbited. She was older by 4 years, successful in ways that were easy to measure: a corner office in the city, a wardrobe that whispered expensive taste, a confidence that filled rooms before she even entered them. When she spoke, people listened. When she left, it was permission for others to join in. I was none of those things. I worked as a librarian in a small branch on the east side of town, a job that Victoria had once described, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as quaint. I wore simple clothes, kept my hair long and usually tied back, and had a habit of listening more than I spoke. Daniel loved these things about me. He said I was his calm in the storm of his family's endless noise. But I knew Victoria saw them differently. To her, I was unremarkable, perhaps even insufficient. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Daniel's parents, Margaret and Robert, were marking their 35th wedding anniversary, and Victoria had insisted on hosting at her home, a sprawling townhouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the last golden light of autumn evenings. She had planned everything meticulously: the catering from that French bistro downtown, the wine pairings, even the specific shade of cream for the table linens. "It needs to be perfect," she had told Daniel over the phone 2 weeks prior, her voice carrying through the speaker as we drove home from the grocery store. "They deserve perfect." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Perfect meant her standards. Perfect meant her control. I had offered to help, of course. I always did. And as always, Victoria had declined with that particular smile of hers, the one that said she appreciated the gesture but knew I couldn't possibly meet her expectations. "You just show up and look pretty," she had said, and I had thanked her, because what else could I do? The evening of the dinner arrived with a crispness that promised winter wasn't far behind. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy dress that Daniel had always liked, simple, elegant, nothing that would draw too much attention. I fastened a thin silver bracelet around my wrist, the one my mother had given me before she passed, and studied myself in the mirror. "You look beautiful," Daniel said, coming up behind me and pressing a kiss to my temple. His reflection smiled at mine, and I felt a flutter of gratitude for this man who had chosen me, who saw me when others didn't. "Thank you," I said quietly, turning to adjust his tie. "Are you ready for tonight?" He sighed, a sound I had come to recognize as both affection and exhaustion when it came to his family. "As ready as I'll ever be. You know how Victoria gets about these things." I did know. I knew that she would have arranged the seating to place herself at the head of the table. I knew that she would steer every conversation, that she would tell stories that positioned her as the devoted daughter, the successful career woman, the one who had it all figured out. And I knew that I would sit quietly, smile at the right moments, and try not to be in the way. We arrived at Victoria's townhouse just as the sun was beginning its descent, painting the brick facade in shades of amber and rose. The door was already open, warm light spilling onto the steps, and I could hear the murmur of voices inside: Margaret's gentle laugh, Robert's deeper rumble, and Victoria's clear, carrying tone orchestrating it all. "There you are!" Victoria appeared in the doorway, resplendent in a burgundy silk blouse and tailored black pants, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon. She kissed Daniel on both cheeks, European style, then turned to me with that smile. "And Emma, how lovely you look." "Thank you," I said, stepping inside. "Your home is beautiful, Victoria. You've outdone yourself." And it was true. The living room had been transformed into something from a magazine spread: soft candlelight, arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus, the dining table set with china that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Everything gleamed. Everything was precisely where it should be. Well, you know me, Victoria said, linking her arm through Daniel's and leading us further inside. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Margaret and Robert were in the living room, standing near the fireplace with glasses of champagne in hand. Margaret, always warm and gentle, immediately pulled me into a hug that smelled of lavender and familiarity. "Emma, dear, it's so good to see you," she said, holding me at arm's length to look at me properly. "You look well. Are you taking care of my son?" "I try my best," I said, smiling. "Happy anniversary. 35 years is remarkable." Robert chuckled, raising his glass. "Remarkable or miraculous, depending on who you ask." He winked at Margaret, who swatted his arm playfully, and I felt a warmth in my chest watching them. This was what I had married into, not just Daniel, but the promise of a love that endured. At a 1.0 pace, Victoria appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne. "Here, Emma, it's a vintage Veuve Clicquot. I had it shipped specially for tonight." I took the glass carefully, aware of the weight of it, the significance she had assigned to every detail. "That's very thoughtful." "Only the best for the people I love," she said, her eyes sweeping over me in a way that felt more like inventory than affection. Then she turned to the room at large, raising her own glass. "Shall we toast before dinner?" We gathered in a loose circle, glasses raised, and Victoria's voice rang out, clear and confident. "To Mom and Dad, 35 years of showing us what true partnership looks like. You've built a beautiful family, a beautiful life, and everything we are is because of you. We love you both so much." "Hear, hear," Daniel and I murmured together, and we all drank. The champagne was crisp and cold, tiny bubbles dancing on my tongue. I noticed the way Victoria watched her parents over the rim of her glass, a genuine softness in her expression that made her look younger, more vulnerable. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her, this woman who worked so hard to be perfect, to be enough, to prove something I had never quite understood. Dinner was called shortly after, and we moved to the dining room table where Victoria had arranged everything with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Margaret and Robert sat at one end, Daniel and I on one side, Victoria directly across from us. The plates were already positioned, the wine glasses gleaming in the candlelight, and in the center of the table a low arrangement of white peonies released their subtle perfume into the air. As we settled into our seats, I noticed something glinting at Victoria's place setting, a jewelry box, small and velvet, placed just above her plate. She caught me looking and smiled. "I have a little presentation planned for later," she said mysteriously. "Something special for Mom." Margaret's eyes lit up with curiosity, but Victoria just shook her head. "After dinner. Patience, Mother." The first course arrived, catered, as promised, with all the elegance Victoria had envisioned. Seared scallops on a bed of cauliflower puree, garnished with microgreens and a drizzle of truffle oil. The conversation flowed easily at first, carried mostly by Victoria's stories from work, her recent promotion, the colleague who had made a fool of himself at the last board meeting. I ate quietly, contributing when spoken to directly, laughing at Robert's jokes, and watching the interplay of this family that had been together long before I became part of it. Daniel's hand found mine under the table at one point, a silent check-in, and I squeezed back. "I'm fine." But I could feel Victoria's attention on me, even when she wasn't looking directly at me. It was like a pressure in the air, a weight of judgment that I had learned to carry without flinching. The second course came, roasted duck breast with a cherry reduction, perfectly medium rare, and the wine was poured, a deep burgundy that Robert praised effusively. Victoria beamed at his approval, and I realized suddenly how much she needed this, the validation, the recognition, the confirmation that she had done well. "So, Emma," Victoria said, setting down her fork and fixing me with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "Daniel mentioned you're working on some kind of literacy program at the library?" All eyes turned to me, and I felt the familiar flutter of discomfort at being the center of attention. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We're starting a reading program for adults who want to improve their literacy skills. It's been really rewarding." "That's wonderful, dear," Margaret said warmly. "Education is such important work." It sounds very community-focused, Victoria added. And there it was again, that particular inflection that made something positive sound vaguely insufficient. Though I imagine the funding must be challenging for something like that. It is, I admitted, but we've been fortunate to receive some grants, and we have a lot of volunteers who believe in the work. Volunteers, Victoria repeated, nodding slowly, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. That's the problem with the nonprofit sector, isn't it? So much passion, so little compensation. I always think about how much good people could do if they were in positions where they actually had resources to deploy. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. Emma does plenty of good, Vic. Not everything is measured in dollar signs. Of course not, Victoria said quickly, her smile never wavering. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I just think it's important to be strategic about impact, that's all. The conversation moved on, but I felt the sting of it settle somewhere in my chest. This was how Victoria operated, small cuts disguised as concern, judgments wrapped in the language of care. And the worst part was that she probably believed she was being helpful, that she was gently nudging me towards something better, something more like her. The main course plates were cleared, and Victoria stood, picking up the small jewelry box from her place setting. Before dessert, she announced, I have something I want to give to Mom. She moved around the table to where Margaret sat, and everyone's attention shifted to watch. Victoria opened a box with a flourish, revealing a delicate gold necklace with a pendant, a circle intertwined with an infinity symbol, studded with small diamonds that caught the candlelight. "Oh, Victoria," Margaret breathed, her hand going to her throat. "It's beautiful." "It's to symbolize your eternal love," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. 35 years and counting. I saw it and immediately thought of you and Dad." She fastened it around Margaret's neck, and Robert leaned over to kiss his wife's cheek, murmuring something that made her eyes shimmer with tears. It was a beautiful moment, genuinely touching, and I found myself smiling despite the complicated knot of feelings I carried for Victoria. "Thank you, sweetheart," Margaret said, pulling Victoria into a tight embrace. "This means the world to me." Victoria returned to her seat, looking satisfied and slightly emotional herself. The dessert arrived shortly after, individual portions of dark chocolate torte with raspberry coulis, and the conversation settled into easier territory. Stories about Margaret and Robert's early years of marriage, the disasters and triumphs that had shaped their decades together. I excused myself during a lull, needing a moment alone to breathe. The bathroom was upstairs, a pristine space with marble counters and the same attention to detail that characterized everything Victoria touched. I took my time, washing my hands slowly, studying my reflection in the mirror. "You're doing fine," I told myself, "just a little longer." When I returned downstairs, I noticed immediately that something had shifted. The atmosphere in the dining room felt different, charged, tense. Victoria was standing near her place at the table, her face pale, her hands moving frantically through the items in front of her. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping into the room. Victoria's head snapped up, and the look in her eyes made me stop in my tracks. It was wild, almost panicked. "My earrings," she said, her voice tight. "They're gone." "Gone?" Margaret stood up, concerned. "What do you mean, dear?" "I took them off before dinner and put them right here on the table. I didn't want to catch them on anything during dinner. But now they're not here. They're just gone." My stomach dropped. "Maybe they fell?" "I've looked," Victoria said sharply, and I noticed her eyes were fixed on me now, a hard, assessing stare. "They were right here, antique gold drops with emeralds. They belonged to Grandmother. They're irreplaceable." The room had gone very quiet. Daniel moved closer to me, his presence protective, but I could feel the weight of everyone's attention settling on us, on me. "When did you last see them?" Robert asked, moving to help Victoria search the floor around the table. "Right before the main course. I specifically remember putting them down." Victoria's voice was rising now, edging towards something sharper. "They were here. Someone must have taken them." The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. I felt my face flush hot with the understanding of what was happening, where this was heading. "Victoria," Daniel said, his voice carrying a warning, What are you suggesting? She turned to face us fully, and I saw it then, the calculation behind the panic, the way she had already decided how this story would unfold. I'm not suggesting anything, I'm stating a fact. My earrings were here, and now they're gone. Emma was the only person who left the room. The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. You can't be serious, Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. I don't want to believe it either, Victoria said, and I marveled at how she managed to sound both hurt and righteous at once. But the facts are the facts. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just saying we need to find them, and Emma was the only person who moved from the table. I didn't take your earrings, Victoria. My voice came out steadier than I felt, years of practice keeping my composure when I wanted to scream. I went to the bathroom, that's all. Then you won't mind if we check? Victoria's eyes were bright now, almost triumphant beneath the mask of concern. Your purse, maybe? Just to clear this up quickly? I felt something crack inside me, a fault line splitting open beneath the careful foundation I had built. This woman, this arrogant, cruel woman, was actually suggesting that I had stolen from her, in front of her parents, in front of my husband? Absolutely not, Daniel said before I could respond. This is ridiculous, Vic. Emma doesn't need to prove anything to you. I'm just trying to find my grandmother's earrings, Victoria said, her voice taking on a wounded quality. If she has nothing to hide, why would it be a problem? Margaret stepped forward, her face troubled. Victoria, dear, perhaps we should all calm down and think about this rationally. Maybe they fell somewhere we haven't looked yet. But Victoria wasn't listening. Her attention was laser-focused on me, and I could see it now. This wasn't really about the earrings at all. This was about something deeper, something that had been building for 3 years. This was about putting me in my place, about reminding everyone that I didn't truly belong, that I was still the outsider who could never quite measure up. Fine, I heard myself say, my voice distant even to my own ears. If it will end this, you can look in my purse. Emma, no, Daniel started, but I was already reaching for my small clutch, the simple navy one that matched my dress. I handed it to Victoria, and the room watched in silence as she opened it. My wallet, a small packet of tissues, my keys, lipstick, nothing else. No emerald earrings hiding in the lining, no evidence of the crime she had so carefully constructed. Victoria's face flickered with something. Disappointment? At a frustration, before she schooled it back into confusion. I don't understand, she said softly. They have to be somewhere. Perhaps you misremembered where you put them, Robert suggested gently. It's been a long evening, sweetheart. Easy to get confused. But Victoria shook her head stubbornly. I know exactly where I put them. They were right on this table. The search continued, everyone now on their hands and knees, checking under the table, behind the buffet, in every possible crack and corner where a pair of earrings might have fallen. I stood apart, my purse still clutched in my hands, feeling the hot sting of tears I refused to shed. Daniel came to stand beside me, his arm around my waist. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry she did this to you. I couldn't respond. If I opened my mouth, everything inside me would come spilling out. The years of small humiliations, the constant sense of being judged and found wanting, the exhaustion of trying to be small enough, quiet enough, acceptable enough for a family that had never really wanted me. I think we should go, I finally said, keeping my voice low. Yes, Daniel agreed immediately. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry, but we need to leave. Margaret reached for my hand, her eyes full of apology. Emma, dear, I'm sure Victoria didn't mean. It's fine, I interrupted gently, because what else could I say? That it wasn't fine? That her daughter had just accused me of theft in front of everyone? That I had been tried and judged at what was supposed to be a celebration of love and commitment? We made our way to the door, Victoria calling after us, that she hoped there were no hard feelings, that she was sure the earrings would turn up. I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to look at her face, to see whatever expression she wore, now that she had gotten what she wanted, my humiliation, my departure, the confirmation of every uncharitable thought she had ever harbored about me. The drive home was silent. Daniel gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white, and I watched the streetlights blur past my window, each one a small sun in the darkness. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he turned to me, his face etched with anger and helplessness. "I can't believe she did that," he said. "I can't believe my own sister would." "It's okay," I said automatically, the words worn smooth from years of use. "It's not okay, Emma. None of this is okay." He reached for my hand. "You know I don't believe her, right? I know you didn't take anything." "I know," I said, and I did. But there was a difference between one person believing in you and feeling believed. And right now, sitting in the car with the engine ticking as it cooled, I felt more alone than I had in years. Inside our apartment, I changed out of my dress and hung it carefully in the closet, smoothing out the fabric as if that could smooth out the evening itself. Daniel paced in the living room, his phone in his hand, texting what I assumed were angry messages to Victoria. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. I made tea instead, because that's what you do when your world tilts sideways. You boil water, you steep leaves, you wait for something to become itself again. The chamomile smelled like childhood, like my mother's kitchen, like a time when I believed that being good and kind was enough to be safe. Daniel found me sitting at the kitchen table, the mug warming my hands. He pulled out the chair beside me and sat down heavily. "She's not responding," he said. "Victoria, she's ignoring my texts." "Maybe that's for the best tonight," I said quietly. No, it's not." He ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. "She needs to apologize. She needs to acknowledge what she did." But I knew Victoria wouldn't apologize. People like her never did. In her mind, she had been protecting her property, acting on reasonable suspicion. She would find a way to justify it, to make herself the victim of the situation, perhaps the victim of having a brother who chose such an inappropriate wife. "Let it go for now," I said, reaching across to still his hands. "Please, I'm tired." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the moment he understood that this wasn't just about tonight. This was about every dinner, every gathering, every subtle slight I had absorbed and carried without complaint. His face crumbled with a guilt that wasn't his to bear. "How long?" he asked. "How long has she been like this with you?" "It doesn't matter." "It does matter, Emma. It matters to me." I sipped my tea, letting the warmth of it settle in my chest. "Since the beginning," I finally admitted. "Not always overtly, just small things, comments, looks, the sense that I was never quite enough." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because she's your sister. Because I didn't want to make you choose. Because I thought if I just kept being patient, kept being kind, she would eventually see that I wasn't a threat, that I wasn't trying to take you away from your family. I was trying to be part of it." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm calling my parents tomorrow. They need to know this isn't acceptable." "Don't," I said quickly. "Please don't make this into a bigger issue." "It already is a bigger issue. She accused you of theft, Emma, in front of everyone. And creating drama will only make things worse. Victoria will just dig in, and your parents will be caught in the middle, and nothing will actually change except everyone will be more uncomfortable." I set down my mug, my hands steadying on the familiar ceramic. "I just need time to think." But thinking, I would discover, was exactly what I should have been doing all along. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of November day that makes you want to stay in bed forever. I didn't have that luxury. It was Saturday, which meant my volunteer shift at the library's literacy program. Daniel tried to convince me to skip it, but I needed the normalcy, needed to do something that reminded me of who I was beyond last night's humiliation. The library was quiet when I arrived, just a handful of patrons browsing the stacks and my fellow volunteers setting up in the community room. I threw myself into the work, helping Mrs. Chen with her English pronunciation, guiding James through a challenging passage in his GED prep book, and watching with satisfaction as understanding dawned on their faces. This was real. This mattered. These people didn't care about designer clothes or corner offices or the delicate politics of family dinners. They cared about learning, about growing, about becoming more than they were yesterday. During my lunch break, I sat in the small staff kitchen with my friend Rachel, another volunteer who had become something of a confidant over the past year. "You okay?" she asked, studying me over her sandwich. "You seem off." I hesitated, then found myself telling her everything. The dinner, the accusation, Victoria's face as she demanded to search my purse. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. "That's awful," she said when I finished. "What a terrible woman." "She's not terrible," I said reflexively, then caught myself. Or maybe she is. I don't know anymore. I've spent so long trying to understand her, trying to be gracious, that I'm not sure what I actually think. Rachel leaned forward. "Can I ask you something? Why do you care so much about what she thinks?" The question caught me off guard. She's Daniel's sister. She's family. Family shouldn't treat you like that. Family shouldn't make you feel small. Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. You don't owe anyone the right to diminish you, not even family. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over in my mind. For 3 years, I had operated under the assumption that earning Victoria's approval was both possible and necessary. But what if it wasn't? What if no amount of patience or kindness would ever be enough, because the problem wasn't me, it was her need to feel superior? "I keep thinking about those earrings," I said slowly, "where they could have gone. Because Victoria isn't careless. She wouldn't have just lost them. And if they really were on the table, someone would have seen them fall." "You think she hid them?" Rachel's eyes widened. "To frame you?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe she really did lose them and just assumed the worst of me, because that's what she's always thought." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. Either way, I can't prove anything. It's her word against nothing, against my absence of guilt. Rachel reached across and squeezed my hand. The truth has a way of coming out. It might take time, but it always does. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe in a universe where justice arrived and dignity was restored. But I had lived long enough to know that sometimes the truth stayed buried, and the story that got told was simply the one people wanted to believe. The rest of the weekend passed in a strange limbo. Daniel spoke to his parents on Sunday, a conversation that left him tight-lipped and frustrated. Apparently, Victoria had doubled down on her version of events, suggesting that maybe I had taken the earrings and then hidden them somewhere before agreeing to the purse search. Margaret had been distressed, Robert had been diplomatic, and no one had actually resolved anything. "She's trying to rewrite what happened," Daniel told me, pacing our living room, "making it sound like you were suspicious from the start, like she had good reason to think—" "Stop," I said. "Please, I can't keep hearing about it." But I couldn't stop thinking about it. It occupied my mind during my shifts at the library, during the quiet moments before sleep, during the long commute through the city. I replayed the evening over and over, looking for something I had missed, some detail that would explain what had happened. And then, on Tuesday afternoon, I received an unexpected call. "Emma, it's Margaret." I had been shelving returns in the history section, and I nearly dropped the book in my hand at the sound of my mother-in-law's voice. We had spoken briefly after Daniel's call on Sunday, but this was different. This was her reaching out directly. "Margaret," I said, moving toward a quiet corner. "Is everything okay?" "I'd like to talk to you, dear, in person if possible. Would you be free for coffee tomorrow morning?" My heart began to pound. "Of course. Where would you like to meet?" We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, a neutral location that felt somehow significant. After hanging up, I stood in the silent library, surrounded by thousands of stories, and wondered which version of this story Margaret believed. The cafe was one of those carefully curated spaces with exposed brick, vintage furniture, and the kind of espresso machine that hissed and steamed like a small dragon. I arrived early, my nerves humming, and ordered a tea I didn't particularly want. When Margaret walked in 5 minutes later, looking elegant in a camel coat and silk scarf, I stood to greet her. "Emma," she said, kissing my cheek, "thank you for meeting me." "Of course," I said, settling back into my seat. "How are you?" She ordered a cappuccino, and we made small talk until it arrived. The weather, Robert's golf game, a new restaurant they had tried. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers worried at the edge of her napkin. Finally, she set down her cup and looked at me directly. "I want to apologize," she said, "for what happened at dinner, for Victoria's behavior, for not stepping in more forcefully when I should have." The apology caught in my chest, equal parts relief and pain. "You don't need to apologize for Victoria." "Don't I?" Margaret's smile was sad. "She's my daughter. I raised her, and somewhere along the way, I failed to teach her that achievement and worth aren't the same thing, that being successful doesn't give you the right to look down on others." I didn't know what to say to that, so I waited. "I've been thinking a lot about that evening," Margaret continued, "about the earrings, about the accusation, and I realized something didn't sit right with me." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "I have a security camera, just inside my front door. Robert installed it last year, after there was some break-ins in the neighborhood. I never think about it anymore." My pulse quickened. And Victoria has a key to our house. She stops by sometimes during the week to check on things when we're at work. Margaret's eyes met mine. "She was there on Thursday afternoon, the day before the dinner." I processed this slowly, understanding dawning. "Why would she?" "I don't know for certain, but I watched the footage from that day." Margaret's voice dropped. "She was only there for about 15 minutes. She went upstairs to my bedroom. When she came down, she was putting something small in her purse." The implications hung between us, heavy and devastating. Victoria had taken her own earrings, or moved them, or hidden them, all to create a situation where she could accuse me, where she could finally prove what she had always believed, that I wasn't worthy of her family, that I was somehow less than. "Why would she do that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Margaret sighed, looking suddenly older. "Because she's struggling. Her company is going through layoffs, and she's terrified of losing her position. Her relationship with Marcus ended badly 6 months ago. Did you know that? She hasn't told anyone in the family. She's drowning, Emma, and instead of asking for help, she's trying to tear someone else down to feel stable again." "That doesn't excuse what she did." "No," Margaret agreed. "It doesn't, but it explains it." Victoria has always measured her worth by external achievements. When those are threatened, she doesn't know who she is anymore. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm just asking you to understand that her cruelty came from her own pain, not from any failing of yours." I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but I blinked them back. "What happens now?" "Now we tell the truth. I've asked Victoria to come to dinner at our house this Sunday. You and Daniel, too. It's time we address this as a family." The thought of facing Victoria again made my stomach churn, but I nodded. Because Margaret was right. The truth needed to come out. Not for revenge, not even for vindication, but because secrets and lies only grew heavier over time. I called Daniel as soon as I left the cafe, my hands shaking as I held the phone to my ear. He listened in stunned silence as I relayed what Margaret had told me, and when I finished, he let out a long breath. "I can't believe she did that," he said. "I mean, I can believe it, but I don't want to. She's my sister." "I know," I said softly. "Are you okay with going to dinner on Sunday?" Was I? I thought about it as I walked through the city streets, past storefronts decorated for the coming holidays, past people hurrying to their own destinations and dramas. Was I okay with facing the woman who had tried to destroy my reputation, who had weaponized her own loss to make me look guilty? "Yes," I finally said, "I need to see this through." The days leading up to Sunday dinner passed with a strange quality, as if time itself was holding its breath. I went to work, I came home, I tried to prepare myself mentally for what was coming. Daniel was a mixture of anger and sadness, processing the betrayal of a sister he had always defended, always believed in. On Saturday night, he found me sitting in the dark living room, staring out at the city lights. "Hey," he said softly, sitting beside me, "what are you thinking?" "That I'm nervous, that part of me wants to skip tomorrow and just move on with my life." "We can do that, if you want. We don't owe them anything." But that wasn't quite true. We owed Margaret the chance to set things right. We owed ourselves the closure of truth. And, in a strange way, we owed Victoria the opportunity to face what she had done. "No," I said. "I need to be there. I need to hear her admit it." Daniel pulled me close, and we sat like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other as the city hummed and glowed beyond our window. Sunday arrived with an unseasonable warmth, as if the universe was trying to soften what was coming. We dressed carefully, Daniel in slacks and a button-down, me in a simple gray dress that made me feel armored somehow. In the car, we didn't talk much, both lost in our own thoughts about what the evening would bring. Margaret and Robert's house was a modest colonial in the suburbs, surrounded by oak trees that had dropped their leaves in a copper carpet across the lawn. Robert opened the door before we could knock, his face grave but warm. "Emma, Daniel, thank you for coming." Inside, I could smell roast chicken and herbs, the kind of homey comfort food that Margaret always made when she was stressed. Victoria was already there, standing by the living room window with a glass of white wine in her hand. She turned when we entered, and I saw that she looked different, smaller somehow, less polished. Her hair was in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer armor. "Victoria," Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral. "Danny," she replied, using the childhood nickname that suddenly sounded painful. We all stood there for a moment, a tableau of tension and unspoken words, until Margaret emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Let's all sit down," she said, gesturing to the living room. "We have things to discuss before dinner." We arranged ourselves, Victoria in the armchair, Daniel and I on the sofa, Margaret and Robert in the love seat. No one seemed to want to start, the silence stretching until Margaret finally broke it. "Victoria," she said, gently but firmly, "I need you to tell Emma and Daniel the truth about what happened at the anniversary dinner." Victoria's face went very still. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Margaret's voice remained steady, but I could hear the disappointment beneath it. "I've seen the security footage from our house. From Thursday afternoon, the day before the dinner." I watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions, confusion, realization, panic, and then something that looked almost like relief. The mask she had been wearing for so long was finally cracking, and underneath it, she looked exhausted. "Mom," she started, but Margaret held up her hand. "The earrings, Victoria. Tell them about the earrings." The silence that followed felt endless. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant sound of a car passing outside, the weight of years of deception settling into this one moment. Victoria set down her wine glass with a hand that trembled slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I took them," she said. "The earrings. I hid them in Mom's jewelry box on Thursday. Then at the dinner, I pretended they were missing from the table." Daniel's hand found mine, gripping tight. I felt a strange numbness spread through me. Not surprise exactly, because some part of me had known, but hearing her admit it out loud was different from suspecting it. "Why?" Daniel asked, and his voice was raw with hurt. "Why would you do that to Emma?" "To your own family?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her fingers to her temples. "Because I'm a terrible person, because I was jealous, because everything in my life is falling apart, and it was easier to make someone else look bad than to admit I'm not as perfect as everyone thinks." "That's not an excuse," Daniel said, his voice hard. "I know it's not." Victoria's tears were falling freely now, her careful composure completely gone. There is no excuse. I was cruel and petty, and I hurt someone who never did anything to deserve it. She turned to look at me directly for the first time since the confession began, and I saw genuine anguish in her face. Emma, she said, her voice breaking, I am so sorry. I'm sorry for that night, for the accusation, for every small cruelty I've inflicted over the past 3 years. I convinced myself you weren't good enough for Daniel, that you were somehow taking him away from the family. But the truth is, I was threatened by you. Threatened by me? I said, finding my voice for the first time. Why? Because you're everything I pretend to be, Victoria said, wiping at her tears with shaking hands. You're genuinely kind. You care about people more than appearances. You have a marriage built on real partnership, not the performance I had with Marcus. And you're content with who you are. You don't need validation from everyone around you to feel worthy. She took a shuddering breath. I've spent my entire life trying to be impressive. The best grades, the best job, the best everything. And I thought if I just achieved enough, I would finally feel enough. But I don't. I'm 39 years old, and I don't know who I am when I'm not winning at something. Margaret moved to sit on the arm of Victoria's chair, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Sweetheart, we never asked you to be perfect. We just wanted you to be happy. But perfect was the only thing I knew how to be, Victoria said. And when the cracks started showing, when Marcus left, when work became uncertain, I panicked. I needed to tear someone else down to feel stable again. And Emma was there, an easy target, someone I had already decided didn't belong. Robert spoke up for the first time, his voice heavy with sadness. Victoria, we raised you better than this. I know, Dad, I know. Victoria's face crumpled. And I hate myself for it. I've replayed that dinner in my head 1,000 times, seen the look on Emma's face when I accused her, watched myself destroy someone's dignity just to feel powerful for a moment. There's no coming back from that. I sat very still, processing everything she was saying. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to feel the satisfaction of being proven right, but mostly I just felt sad. For Victoria, for the years she had spent chasing an impossible standard, for the loneliness that must have accompanied all that perfection. Daniel wasn't as forgiving. You could have destroyed Emma's reputation. You could have damaged her relationship with this family permanently. And for what? To feel better about your own failures? Daniel, Margaret started, but he cut her off. No, Mom, this isn't something we can just smooth over with an apology and a family dinner. Victoria deliberately tried to make Emma look like a criminal. She stood there and watched Emma offer to have her purse searched, knowing full well that there was nothing in it. That's not just a mistake. That's calculated cruelty. Victoria nodded, accepting his anger. You're right. All of that is true. And I understand if you never want to speak to me again, if Emma never wants to be in the same room as me. I understand if I've lost you both. The room fell silent again. Margaret's hand still rested on Victoria's shoulder, Robert sat with his head bowed, and Daniel vibrated with barely contained fury beside me. And I sat in the middle of it all, feeling the weight of a decision I hadn't asked to make. Finally, I spoke. Why did you really call me here today, Margaret? My mother-in-law looked at me with eyes that had seen 35 years of marriage, that had raised 2 children, that had learned something about forgiveness that I was still trying to understand. Because families are complicated, messy things, she said. Because we hurt each other sometimes, even when we love each other. And because I believe that truth and accountability are the first steps toward healing, not the end of the conversation, but the beginning. You want me to forgive her, I said flatly. I want you to do whatever feels right to you, Margaret corrected gently. But I also want you to know that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting or condoning or pretending it didn't hurt. Forgiveness is what you do for yourself to let go of the poison of carrying someone else's wrong. I looked at Victoria, really looked at her. I saw the expensive therapy she probably needed, the vulnerability she had spent her whole life hiding, the shame that was eating her alive, and I realized something. Holding on to my anger wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't erase the humiliation of that dinner. It wouldn't restore the 3 years of small slights and judgments. But it would keep me tethered to this moment forever, replaying the hurt, rehearsing the grievance, giving Victoria power over my peace long after she deserved any space in my thoughts. I can't forgive you today, I said to Victoria, and I watched her face fall. But I might be able to someday, if you do the work, if you actually change, not just apologize and go back to being who you were. Victoria nodded, tears still streaming down her face. I understand, and I'll do the work. I've already started seeing a therapist. I'm trying to figure out why I am the way I am, why I need external validation so desperately that I'd hurt someone to get it. Good, I said simply. Because you need help, Victoria. You need to figure out how to be okay with yourself when you're not winning, when you're not the most impressive person in the room. And until you do that, you're going to keep hurting people. Daniel shifted beside me, and I could feel him struggling between his loyalty to me and his love for his sister. I squeezed his hand, letting him know it was okay, that I could handle this. I also need to say something, I continued, my voice growing stronger. For 3 years, I've made myself smaller to try to fit into this family. I've accepted your judgments, your criticisms, your subtle implications that I wasn't good enough. I told myself it was patience, that it was grace, that it was what you do to keep the peace. I stood up, needing to be on my feet for this. But it wasn't patience, it was erasure. I was erasing parts of myself to make you comfortable, Victoria, and that's on me as much as it's on you. I should have set boundaries. I should have said 3 years ago, no, actually, my job is important. My choices are valid. I don't need to justify my worth to you. Victoria looked up at me and I saw something shift in her expression, not just shame now, but recognition. You're right, she said. You should have, and I should have listened. So here's what's going to happen going forward, I said, feeling a strange sense of liberation and finally speaking my truth. I'm done making myself small. I'm done accepting crumbs of approval. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, it needs to be one where I'm respected as an equal member of this family. Not the quiet daughter-in-law who knows her place, but a person with her own value, her own voice, her own right to take up space. Margaret was smiling now, her eyes bright with what looked like pride. That sounds exactly right, Emma. And Victoria, I continued, I hope you get help. I hope you figure out how to be happy without needing to diminish others, because there's enough room in the world for both of us to be worthy. My worthiness doesn't threaten yours, and yours doesn't diminish mine. Victoria stood up then, slowly, as if the weight of the conversation had aged her. She took a step toward me, then stopped, uncertain. Can I hug you? She asked, her voice small. Or is that too much to ask right now? I considered it. Part of me wanted to say no, to maintain the distance, to protect myself from further hurt. But another part, the part that remembered how Margaret had described forgiveness, knew that small gestures of grace didn't cost me my boundaries. Okay, I said. Victoria crossed the space between us and wrapped her arms around me, and I felt her body shake with silent sobs. She whispered against my shoulder, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility of us. When she pulled back, her face was blotchy and her mascara had run, and she looked more human than I had ever seen her, more real. Dinner was a quieter affair than the anniversary celebration had been. Margaret's roast chicken was perfect, as always, and the conversation stayed in safe territory. Books I was reading, a project Robert was working on in the garage, plans for the upcoming holidays. But there was a different quality to it now, an honesty that hadn't existed before. At one point, Victoria asked me about the literacy program, and this time there was genuine interest in her voice, no underlying judgment. We are actually expanding to include financial literacy workshops, I told her. A lot of our participants struggle with budgeting and understanding credit. We're partnering with a local nonprofit that specializes in financial education. That's really smart, Victoria said. Have you thought about reaching out to corporations for sponsorships? I have some contacts at local banks who fund community programs. I could make some introductions if you'd like. I studied her face, looking for the catch, the subtle dig, but there was none. This was Victoria trying, in her own way, to build a bridge. That would actually be really helpful, I said. Thank you. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. When I glanced at him, he was looking at me with such love and admiration that I felt my chest tighten. This was what partnership looked like, standing beside each other through the messy, complicated work of being human with other humans. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Margaret pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I am proud of you," she said quietly. "What you said earlier about taking up space, about requiring respect, that took courage." "I should have said it years ago," I admitted. "Maybe, or maybe you needed these 3 years to really understand what you needed to say." She touched my cheek gently, a maternal gesture that made my heart ache for my own mother. "Either way, you said it beautifully, and I promise you things will be different now." In the car on the way home, Daniel was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you better, from Victoria, from all of it." "You couldn't have protected me from something I wasn't willing to name," I said. "I kept telling you it was fine, that I could handle it. How were you supposed to know how much it was really affecting me?" "I should have seen it anyway." "Maybe, but we're both learning." I reached over and took his hand. "What matters is what we do now, going forward." "You were incredible tonight," he said. "The way you stood up for yourself, the way you drew boundaries while still leaving room for healing." "I've never been more in love with you than I was watching you claim your space in my family." I felt tears prick at my eyes, the good kind this time. It felt good, scary, but good. "Are you really willing to forgive her eventually?" he asked, "or did you just say that to be gracious?" I thought about it as the city lights blurred past the window. I think I meant it. Not because Victoria deserves it. I'm not sure forgiveness is about deserving, but because I don't want to carry the weight of what she did for the rest of my life. I don't want her to have that power over me. "That's very wise," Daniel said softly. "Or very tired," I said with a small laugh. "Maybe I'm just too tired to stay angry." But it was more than that, and I knew it even as I said it. The truth was, Victoria's cruelty had taught me something important, that my value wasn't determined by other people's perceptions, that dignity was something I carried within myself, that no one could take my peace unless I gave it to them. The weeks that followed were a study in small changes. Victoria sent me a long email, not making excuses, but explaining her journey in therapy, the insights she was gaining about herself, the work she was doing. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process it, to decide how much emotional labor I was willing to invest in her healing. But I did eventually respond, keeping it brief and honest. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I'm glad you're getting help. I'm not ready for regular contact yet, but I appreciate your transparency." Her response was equally brief. "I understand. I'll be here when and if you're ever ready." Meanwhile, life continued. The literacy program expanded, and true to her word, Victoria made introductions to several corporate sponsors who funded the financial education workshops. She did it through email, through intermediaries, without asking for credit or recognition. It felt like penance, and I let it be that. Daniel and I started couples therapy, not because we were struggling, but because we wanted to process everything that had happened, to build better communication, to ensure that we never again let something fester unspoken between us. Our therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Chen, helped us understand that what we had been through was a form of family trauma, and that healing from it required intentionality. The thing about family systems, Dr. Chen said during one session, is that they resist change. Everyone has a role, and when someone steps out of that role, the whole system has to reorganize itself. What Emma did at that dinner, claiming her voice, setting boundaries, that forced a reorganization. "Is that why it felt so scary?" I asked. "Exactly. You were breaking an unspoken rule, that you would stay small and accommodating. When you broke that rule, you didn't know if the system would adapt or reject you entirely." "But it adapted," Daniel said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "It did," Dr. Chen agreed, "and that's the beautiful part of this story. The family chose growth over comfort. That doesn't always happen." Thanksgiving came, and with it, the question of where to spend the holiday. Traditionally, we had alternated between Daniel's family and mine, but my parents had passed years ago, and my sister lived overseas, which meant this year would have been with the Harrisons. "We don't have to go," Daniel said as the date approached. "We can start our own traditions, just the two of us." I considered it. The idea was appealing, a quiet Thanksgiving without tension, without the complicated dynamics of Victoria's presence. But I also remembered what Margaret had said about families being messy, complicated things. And I thought about the fact that avoiding difficult situations wasn't the same as setting boundaries. "I think we should go," I said finally. "But I need to know Victoria will be there. I don't want to walk into any surprises." Daniel called his mother, and she confirmed that yes, Victoria would be there, and that she had asked specifically if we were coming, wanting to know if our presence would make things uncomfortable. "Tell her we're coming," I said when Daniel relayed this to me, "and that I'm willing to share a table with her as long as we're both committed to being respectful." Thanksgiving Day arrived with a bitter cold that promised snow. We drove to Margaret and Robert's house through gray skies, and I felt my stomach twist with familiar anxiety. But it was different now, not the anxiety of someone trying to be invisible, but the healthy nervousness of someone about to do something difficult but important. Victoria's car was already in the driveway when we arrived. Inside, the house smelled of turkey and sage, and I could hear laughter coming from the kitchen, Margaret's and Victoria's, layered together in a sound that spoke of their own healing. When we walked in, Victoria was at the counter mashing potatoes, her hair in a messy bun, wearing a flannel shirt I had never seen her in before. She looked up when she heard us, and something flickered across her face. Hope? Fear? Before settling into a tentative smile. "Hey," she said simply. "Hey," I replied. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and honest felt like enough for right now. The dinner was easier than I expected. We talked about safe things mostly, but there were moments when Victoria would start to slip into her old patterns, offering unsolicited advice, positioning herself as the expert, and then actually catch herself mid-sentence and course correct. "Sorry," she said after one such moment, "old habits." What I meant to say was, "That sounds like you've really thought it through." It was awkward, watching her try so hard, but it was also genuine, and I found myself appreciating the effort even when the execution wasn't perfect. At one point, when the men were in the living room watching football and Margaret was on the phone with a relative, Victoria and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen doing dishes. We worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the splash of water and the clink of plates. Then Victoria spoke. "I've been reading a lot about narcissistic behavior," she said quietly. "Not because I think I have narcissistic personality disorder, my therapist says I don't, but because I recognize some of those patterns in myself. The need for admiration, the difficulty with empathy, the tendency to devalue others." I didn't say anything, just kept washing the dishes in my hands. "The thing that scared me most," she continued, "was reading about how narcissistic people choose their targets. They go after people who have something they want: internal peace, authentic confidence, the ability to be comfortable with themselves." She paused, setting down the dish she was drying. "I went after you because you had everything I was pretending to have." I turned off the water and faced her. "Thank you for telling me that. It doesn't excuse what I did." "No," I agreed, "but understanding why helps. It helps me know that it really wasn't about me, about some failing in me that justified your treatment. It was always about you." Victoria nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't expect you to ever see me as anything but the person who tried to destroy your reputation. But I want you to know that I'm trying to become someone different, someone better." "I can see that," I said, and I meant it. We returned to the dishes, but something had shifted between us. Not friendship, not yet, maybe not ever, but a kind of mutual recognition, an acknowledgement that we were both flawed humans trying to do better than our worst moments. As the months passed, this became the new normal. Family gatherings where Victoria and I were cordial, sometimes even warm. Conversations that felt less like navigating a minefield and more like actual communication. Moments when I could see the person Victoria was becoming, still confident, still successful, but softer somehow, more willing to be vulnerable. She started dating someone new, a quiet man named Thomas who worked in environmental nonprofit sector, and I watched her light up when she talked about him in a way that felt different from how she had spoken about Marcus, less performative, more real. He doesn't care that I'm successful, she told me once, sounding almost bewildered by this. I mean, he thinks it's nice, but it's not why he likes me. He likes me because I make him laugh, because I'm good at trivia, because I cry at animal rescue videos. Those are good reasons to like someone, I said, smiling. They're such normal reasons, she said, and there was wonder in her voice. I spent my whole life trying to be extraordinary, and it turns out the person I want to be with just wants me to be me, whoever that is. Are you figuring that out? I asked. Who you are? She considered this. I think so, slowly. I'm learning that I actually like gardening, which I never would have tried before because it seemed too domestic, too ordinary. I volunteer at a food bank on weekends. I've been taking a pottery class, and I'm terrible at it, but I keep going anyway because it's fun to be bad at something without it meaning anything about my worth. I felt a genuine warmth toward her in that moment. This was what healing looked like: messy, uncomfortable, honest. By the time we reached the anniversary of that awful dinner, I realized I was no longer angry. Somewhere in the gradual accumulation of apologies and changed behaviors, of therapy and tears and small acts of bridge building, I had let go of the poison Victoria had tried to plant in me. I hadn't forgotten what she had done. The memory was still there, still clear, but it no longer had power over me. It was just a thing that had happened, a chapter in my story rather than the defining narrative. Daniel noticed the change in me. You seem lighter, he said one evening as we cooked dinner together in our small kitchen. I feel lighter, I admitted, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I didn't realize how much it weighed until I finally put it down. I'm glad, he said, kissing my temple. You deserve to feel light. That Sunday, we went to Margaret and Robert's for dinner, a regular family meal now, nothing special, nothing fraught, just pasta and salad and conversation about ordinary things. Victoria was there with Thomas, and I was struck by how comfortable she seemed, how unguarded. After dinner, she asked if we could talk privately. We went out onto the back porch, where the April air was finally warming after a long winter. I wanted to give you something, she said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a small box, and my stomach dropped for a moment, remembering another small box, another piece of jewelry, another night that had changed everything. But when she opened it, inside were the emerald earrings. These are the ones I used to hurt you, she said softly. I took them back from Mom's jewelry box the next day. I've kept them all this time because I couldn't figure out what to do with them. They belonged to our grandmother, so they have family history. But every time I looked at them, all I could see was what I had done. She held the box out to me. I want you to have them. I stared at the earrings, at the antique gold and green stones that had been the centerpiece of my humiliation. Victoria, I can't. Please, she interrupted, not because you have to forgive me, and not because it erases anything, but because I want them to mean something different. I want them to be a reminder that people can change, that terrible moments don't have to define us forever. And I want you to have something of value from this family, something that says you belong. I took the box carefully, feeling the weight of it in my palm. These earrings had nearly destroyed me, and now they were being offered as a symbol of redemption, of transformation, of the long road from cruelty to contrition. Thank you, I said quietly. I'll treasure them. You don't have to wear them if it's too painful, Victoria said quickly. I just wanted you to have them. But I found myself fastening them to my ears right there on the porch, feeling the unfamiliar weight of them, the way they caught the early evening light. When I turned to face her, Victoria's eyes were filled with tears. You look beautiful, she said. They suit you. Thank you, I said again. And then, because it felt right, because it was time, I forgive you, Victoria. She broke down then, actually sobbed, and I found myself pulling her into a hug, this woman who had tried to destroy me, this woman who had spent the last year rebuilding herself into someone worthy of forgiveness. "Thank you," she whispered against my shoulder. "Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for being bigger than my worst moment." "We're all trying to be bigger than our worst moments," I said softly. "That's what being human is." When we went back inside, Daniel took one look at the earrings in my ears and understood what had happened. He raised his eyebrows in question, and I nodded. "It's okay. We're okay." That night, as we drove home through the spring darkness, I reached up and touched the earrings, feeling their solid reality against my fingertips. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked. "Free," I said, and it was true. I feel free. In the years that followed, Victoria and I built something that looked like friendship, though we never quite called it that. We were family. Complicated, messy family, and that seemed more honest than pretending we had some uncomplicated bond. She came to the library sometimes to help with the financial literacy workshops, using her corporate expertise to teach budgeting and investment basics. She was good at it, patient and clear, and I could see how much it meant to her to use her skills for something that wasn't about her own advancement. Thomas proposed, and she asked me to be one of her bridesmaids, not the maid of honor, because we both knew that would be pushing things, but a bridesmaid. I said yes, and I meant it. At the wedding, I wore the emerald earrings. Victoria noticed, of course. Our eyes met across the reception hall, and she mouthed, "Thank you," and I understood that we were both grateful, her for the forgiveness, me for the freedom that came with offering it. Daniel and I eventually started talking about starting our own family, and when I got pregnant with our daughter, Victoria was one of the first people to send a gift, a beautiful children's book about a little girl who was brave and kind and true to herself. "I want her to grow up knowing she doesn't have to be perfect," Victoria had written in the card, "just real." The dinner, where everything had fallen apart, became a story we told, not to dwell on the pain, but to mark the distance we had traveled. It became a reminder that the worst moments of our lives don't have to be the end of the story. They can be the beginning of a different story, one where people choose growth over pride, truth over appearance, healing over comfort. On the night our daughter was born, Victoria showed up at the hospital with flowers and tears in her eyes. "She's perfect," she whispered, looking through the nursery window at the tiny sleeping face of my child. "She's real," I corrected gently, "and that's better than perfect." Victoria smiled at that, a smile that held years of therapy and humility and hard-won wisdom. "You're right, real is so much better." As I sat in my hospital bed later that night, holding my daughter and watching the city lights through the window, I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The humiliation and the healing, the cruelty and the contrition, the long journey from that awful dinner to this perfect present. I thought about Victoria, about how she had tried to steal my peace with her lies, her accusations, her desperate need to feel superior. And I thought about what I had learned, that peace isn't something you can steal from someone else, no matter how hard you try. Peace isn't found in being impressive or perfect or better than everyone around you. Peace is what you earn by telling the truth, to yourself first and then to the people you've hurt. Peace is what you build when you stop performing and start being real. Daniel came in then, exhausted and elated, and sat beside me on the bed. Together, we looked down at our daughter, this new life that held infinite possibility. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. I touched the emerald earrings in my ears, feeling their weight, their history, their transformation from instruments of cruelty to symbols of grace. "I'm thinking about stories," I said, "about how they change depending on how we tell them, how we choose to remember them." "And how will you remember this story?" Daniel asked. I considered the question, holding my daughter close. "Not as the story of how I was betrayed," I said finally, "but as the story of how I learned to take up space. How I learned that my voice matters, that my presence matters, that I don't have to make myself small for anyone." "That's a good story," Daniel said, kissing my forehead. "It is," I agreed, "and it has a happy ending, not because everything was perfect, but because everyone chose to be real." My daughter stirred in my arms, making small sounds that might have been dreams or might have been the first whispers of consciousness. I looked down at her perfect, unmarked face and made a silent promise. I would teach her to be brave, I would teach her to be kind, but most of all, I would teach her to be herself, unapologetically and completely. Because in the end, that was the greatest gift Victoria's cruelty had given me. It had forced me to choose. Would I keep shrinking to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be? Or would I stand up and claim my own space, my own voice, my own worth? I had chosen to stand, and in standing, I had found my peace. The emerald earrings glinted in the soft hospital light, and I thought about Grandmother Harrison, who had worn them decades ago, who had her own stories of survival and dignity. These earrings had been passed down through generations of strong women, and now they had witnessed my own transformation from silent acceptance to vocal self-worth. They would be my daughter's someday, I decided, and when I gave them to her, I would tell her this story, not to burden her with family drama, but to teach her that even our worst moments can be redeemed, that people can change, that forgiveness is possible, that peace is earned through truth. In the quiet of the hospital room, with my husband beside me and my daughter in my arms, I felt a completeness I had never known before. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. Victoria had tried to take my peace with her lies, with her calculated cruelty, with her desperate need to prove I didn't belong. But peace isn't something you can steal from someone. Peace isn't about being accepted by people who never wanted to accept you. Peace isn't about proving you're worthy to those who've already decided you're not. Peace is what you carry inside yourself when you finally understand that your worth isn't determined by other people's judgments. Peace is what you build when you stop seeking validation from those who are incapable of giving it. Peace is what you earn by choosing truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, your own voice over the silence others prefer. I touched my daughter's soft cheek, feeling the miracle of her existence, and smiled. The story that began with humiliation had ended with grace. The accusations had been answered with truth. The cruelty had been met with forgiveness. And through it all, I had learned the most important lesson of my life. She tried to take my peace with her lies, but peace isn't something you can steal, it's something you earn by telling the truth.